Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our panel luncheon after the earthquake, the district council elections amid Hong Kong's shifting political landscape. Please continue to eat. We wanted to just get going right away because we have a really great panel today and have a lot to talk about. Just a few things before we start. We are streaming this live on Facebook, and then it will go on YouTube. So keep that in mind, if you can keep kind of clatter to a minimum. Please make sure all your electronic devices are turned off. And we will have questions at the end. When we get to questions, there will be handheld mics that come around. Please use those to ask your questions, and please identify yourself and your affiliation. And I just remembered I didn't identify myself. I'm Jody Schneider. I'm president of the club, and I'm an editor at Bloomberg News here in Hong Kong. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce our panelists from here because we want to get started right away. What we're going to talk about, obviously, are the district council elections held November 24th, described in some press reports as a political tsunami, an earthquake, delivered a landslide for pro-democracy candidates who won 393, or almost 9 of 10, of the 452 seats. Pro-establishment camp ended up with just 60 seats, compared with 292 previously. One of our speakers told me part of the problem with being in the majority when you haven't for so long is there's all kinds of administrative things you now need to do. But we're going to talk about what this means, what happens now, and will these results likely be replicated in the upcoming legislative council elections. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. They can tell you a little bit more about themselves when they start to speak if they want. But I'm going to start on the end here with Derek Yuen, who is a Hong Kong-born and based strategist, scholar, and columnist. He has a PhD in strategic studies from the University of Reading and is the author of Deciphering Sun Tzu, How to Read the Art of War. He's a former associate member of the Central Policy Unit of the Hong Kong government and former policy director of the New People's Party. He teaches at the University of Hong Kong and regularly contributes political commentaries. A fact not in his bio, but I just learned, is that he met his wife, who is, he says he is a somewhat political husband, because she's in politics, and they met in Regina Ip's office. So they have Regina Ip to thank for that and for their child and their upcoming child. Next, I'd like to introduce Christine Fong, who is a district council member in the Sai Kung district, where she served since 2008. She was just reelected in November. Congratulations. She founded Professional Power, which has 3 members in that Sai Kung District Council, the largest group outside the pro-democracy camp. She campaigned on environmental issues. She's a former TV actress, studied business administration, and is a chartered engineer. This is her very first time at the FCC, in the club even, although she grew up near here and walked by here going to her parents' store when she was growing up. So we welcome Christine to the club. And then to my right is Derek Yuen. Derek is on the end. This is Kin-Hei, who is elected vice chairperson of the Democratic Party in 2012, becoming the youngest vice chairperson in the party's history. He is now chairperson for the Southern District Council, re-elected in November. Congratulations. And his main responsibilities as vice chairperson include devising campaign strategies, maintaining media relationships and public image, and engaging with young people. So I'd like to get started right away. My opening question, beyond telling us a little bit more about you and how you fit into the whole political landscape here in Hong Kong, is to say, what do you think the results of this election actually mean? While it was historic vote for Hong Kong, more than 70% turnout, a landslide victory for pro-democracy candidates, it was, after all, a very local election. And it's been a little less than 2 months, and we haven't really seen much change in Hong Kong. So does this election end up meaning much? And I'll start with you here.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you, FCC, for inviting me here to share my views with all of you. To respond to your question, I think the result is purely a referendum. It is you know, the local district council, you never think about, we're talking about political things. We talk about livelihood things. We talk about how the streets is managed, how the whole food store is being kept clean, and how the noise to be kept in the minimal level. We don't talk about a lot about the political system of Hong Kong. But this time when we have a chance, when Hong Kong people got a chance to voice their views, to express their views in response to those 6 months before. I think Hong Kong people take this chance to actually voice out and tell them we had enough for the government. We are very unhappy with the government. Actually, when I'm campaigning for myself, most of the things that I heard on the street is that the police, you can arrest the youngsters. If they break the law, you can arrest them. But why you have to beat them up like that? And where is the accountability of the police and the government? The government made such a fuss, and nobody in the cabinet, nobody in the police is being suspended or they're being ousted. So I think it is kind of a response to the irresponsibility of the government. And they tell the public and they tell the world that Hong Kong people, we support the protests and the government should respond to the protests. And I think this is the referendum that we had in 24th of November. But of course, we can say it's almost 2 months now. There's not much changes because the session is not open yet. I'm just elected as the chairman of the Southern District Council last week, but I'm quite sure the 17 district councils that we're in control, we will have a lot of follow-up on the police brutality and how the government should be responsible. And of course, we are not expecting the government will respond to the district council very well. They don't respond to the legislative council, not to speak about the district council. But I think it's important for us to keep the momentum of the movement, to keep the momentum of the protest, and let the world know and let the Hong Kong people know we're not ending this just because we won the election. The election is just another starting point of a new kind of a movement campaign.
So you see it as symbolic, largely, or?
Yeah, I think it's very symbolic. I think, I'm elected as the district council for the 3rd term, but a lot of people, they just came to the election just 2 months or 3 months before the election actually happened. And you didn't expect them to have any so-called groundwork or local work that appeal to the public. So in those districts, you can see very clearly that people are voting for their political belief, even though it is a district council election.
Christine, do you see it that way as well, or do you have a different view?
Well, firstly, thank you. It's my honor to be here and with all of you. Well, as a member, council member for more than 12 years in this, my constituency in Sai Kung and Cheung Kwan O, I don't think it is a party alteration is very common in around the world. So I think this time, is it a referendum election? This outcome, then I think obviously there's a very clear message from the protests since June, which I also get involved. We also get into the assembly and march in Victoria Park to Central. But I'm also part of the 2 million people. But I do think that even though Hong Kong people did disagree with the content and many dissatisfied with the government, what they did, or plus many accumulate this content about livelihood issues, for example, like what Mr. Low said, like housing, whatever, livelihood issues. But I think people still doesn't want to have the violence keep up in Hong Kong, and try to resume to normal. So certainly we need to. I think the government should respond to the 5 demands from the protester on what they request so far. I think particularly the COI, which I as my think tank, Professional Power, we did support from the very beginning, like even from June 9, we were protest and marching. But still, I think I'm the one that like 和理非 is peaceful, rational, but non-violence. That's what I think most of our Hong Kong people looking for. But political party swinging or political alteration is often. So you can look back to Hong Kong history, back to Hong Kong like in 2003, election after the controversies over legislation of Article 23. Well, Democratic won the most seats. And then after 4 years later, pro-establishment camp become largest party, biggest party again. So history repeats itself. The pro-government camp, landslide laws. I think one of the major reasons is because of the extradition bill. And plus there are many discontent of government, particularly housing, social mobility, and so on. So I think it's all depend, and one critical point, no matter we are district councillor or legislative members, we have to remember what they are doing, right things, or will they listen to the people? That's the most important. If we don't, then people will certainly vote you out. Thank you.
Thank you. So Derek, let's put on your academic hat. And first of all, I'm interested whether you were surprised by the turnout or the success of the pro-democracy candidates in this election.
I didn't thought it was that devastating for the pro-Beijing camp.
And what implications what actual implications do you think this has?
I think it's a fundamental shift, because the district council election very likely will prove a catalyst to bring about long overdue political changes and policy shift in Hong Kong. We've already seen one of the major repercussions of earlier, of the election. That is, Wang Jimin lost his job as the Hong Kong Liaison Office Chief and replaced by Luo Huining. And this left the pro-Beijing camp in disarray. And rather clearly, the election is the last straw that breaks the camel's back. And it seems to me, because of this devastating blow to Beijing and to the pro-Beijing camp, this left Beijing with little choice but to start engaging with the new situation and seeking realistic solutions. But here I have one observation. I think Mr. Low can answer me later on. Even though the pro-democracy camp won the greatest electoral landslide in district council election, it may well be facing an even more volatile and uncertain future, because throughout the years we tend to label the opposition or the opposition camp as pan-democratic or pro-democracy camp. Yet, from the latest composition of the pro-democracy camp, it is equally suitable to call it a pro-localist camp or even a populist camp, as the face of the camp is just ambiguous, and Pandem parties only takes up a third of the overall seats won. So to me, it seems that the future is quite uncertain, especially for the pro-democracy camp, because the future depends greatly on whether the Pandem parties can incorporate these newcomers, and if they can be finally incorporated into the system, into the institution. But whichever the case may be, I think there will be some newcomers who will run in the coming legislative election and will challenge the Pan-Democrats. So this could be problematic.
I'm going to let you respond right away. I saw you taking notes. So.
Well, I think the political landscape has been changing for many years, especially for my party, because in the past, in 1995 or so or before, we're the major or only significant political party in the pro-democracy side, and we won a lot of seats back then. But then, with the political landscape changing and with the system, the election system that designed for the small parties for participating, the proportionate representation election system in the legislative council, we have been losing seats since then. I think it is a challenge, but I think it is also a chance for our parties and for the more old parties, more traditional parties, to actually think about Hong Kong, because in the past we tend to label all the localists as fascists or discriminating, something like that. But I think it's a good chance for us to reflect on how Hong Kong people actually felt and how Hong Kong people actually think about the situation in Hong Kong, whether we are okay to go on with the situation, like a lot of people are coming to Hong Kong for visiting, the permit that guarantee mainland people coming to Hong Kong is still 150, and it's still the Chinese government who grant those permits. I think these are all the things that the pro-democracy side, the more traditional camps, we have to think about as well. So I think it's a good chance for everybody to actually think, and for the public and for the society to actually discuss all those things. So I see them not as a threat, but I see them as some new challenges that the society have to face, because they represent the threshold of the society, and they have their say. So I think I will try my very best to communicate with them, to talk to them, to see whether there are something in common that we can put forth together and strive together.
A few of you have mentioned the referendum, that this was a referendum, and the media has said it was a referendum on the protests on Carrie Lam and her administration's leadership. Some also said on China's approach to Hong Kong and even on the one country, two systems political strategy. I'm interested if you see it this way, or we in the media have to come up with theories. So we do. Also, we just had an election in Taiwan this weekend, landslide victory there for the pro-Taiwan and anti-reunification candidate. And the party is also being seen as anti-China referendum. And I'd welcome your thoughts on that. Do these two elections have much in common? Or again, is this just, we in the media need to write interesting stories? Derek, you want to start with that?
I read from one of the Facebook posts that it happens in the district council election. The pro-democracy camp got around 57–58% of the votes, and for Tsai Ing-wen, the winner, in the presidential election, I think she gained almost probably the same amount of votes. Yeah, so I think this is quite interesting. If we're seeing it as a referendum. Maybe anti-China referendum.
Do you think that's valid, or again, is it do these two elections have much to do with each other? Yeah, if you want to address that. Yeah. I'm going to ask you that. And then
of course, this could be just out of coincidence, but since the developments in Hong Kong and Taiwan are now closely linked, so and I can't say we have a very similar popular structure, but we know that the youngsters, the young people, they just don't trust any pro-Beijing force or organization or parties. So I think this pretty much give more or less the same picture. Particularly in Hong Kong, I think for the maybe it's a bit offensive here for a boomer. More baby boomers may support the government, because they have been making a lot of money in Hong Kong, and I think and they think no one should trash their wealth and anything well-being, whatever. But in Taiwan, I think there are more countrymen. They're not countryside people. They're more not necessarily farmers, but those people can be a lot more easily influenced by the communists. So in this sense, so even though these two groups of people are influenced by Beijing in different ways, but I think this make up more or less, similar proportion in the population.
Christine, what do you think? Do you think that there is a tie between these two elections, and what's your view on this whole referendum theory?
Well, back to the answer from Taiwan, this president election, I think Hong Kong as AR, as a part of China, I think this time that where our position is like a pawn, become a pawn between Taiwan and as a step or selling the, if you don't, I think President Chai Ing-wen, she can use up the way that what happened in Hong Kong as a strong argument to win this election very beautifully, frankly speaking. Well, talking about 8 million people, but we cannot neglect. I mean, the Kuomintang KMT, they also have 5.5 million people who cast their vote to Han Kuo-yu, Mr. Han. So I think have to be balanced to each side. I think for political angle and as well as a counselor in Hong Kong, I would say political cannot suppress a livelihood issue, and both are equally important. So in case next time, if the economy is not running good again in Taiwan, and the bell will swing again, and party alteration will happen again, and the history will reflect the situation. So I think this time, unfortunately, Hong Kong go through those mayhem since June, and it really hurt our economy a lot. So I hope we can resume back to normal as soon as possible.
I'd like to ask you about the referendum question, but also about, since you were the youngest vice chairman elected, how much of this is young people, wanting change, and but will they continue to vote this way and continue to turn out in these numbers if they don't get that change?
First of all, I think Hong Kong and Taiwan is very closely related. I mean, in this election, in President Tsai, if we turn our clock back for 6 months, President Tsai approval rate in Taiwan is around 16 or 15%. And then the Hong Kong protests and her support actually turned the tide. I think it's a referendum on the identity of the Taiwan people. Whether they think they're the Taiwanese or they think they're part of China, whether they have to, part of the PRC, I mean, yeah, because in Taiwan they call themselves China as well. So I think that kind of referendum is a little bit different than the Hong Kong one, because we're the referendum for the protests. And of course, the referendum is also about our Hong Kong identity as well a little bit. But mostly it's about the protests. But in the Taiwan, I think it's about whether they can survive as a unique place, a place that they call it a country, and they can survive with their system or regional system, that they can still elect the president, their legislative yuan, the local governments, or they are going to accept the one country, two system like Hong Kong. So I think it's very much connected to Hong Kong situation, but I think the referendum are quite different in context. And for the younger generation in Hong Kong, I think after these 6 months, we're not going to be asleep again. If you can imagine that there's a youngster who came out to protest for so hard for 6 months, you can't expect them. Okay, next time election, I'm going to stay at home and I'm never going to vote again. I don't expect that, and I actually heard a lot of people, younger people especially, they're saying, well, in the past we're too numb. We're really, really too numb that we allow the government and the pro-establishment camp to do whatever they want. And that has to change. And this is not just this time. It's every time, every single election, they're going to come out and vote again. And I quite believe that this kind of structural changes is not a small number, because I remember I read some poll saying that they asked people if they have a choice whether to go back 6 months ago and nothing happened, or they can choose to live like reality, like now. How would you choose? And the result is quite exciting or quite shocking for me, that most of the people, they choose, okay, we stayed here. We don't go back, because in the past, it is just a numb situation, but you're being killed slowly. But now we are all awakened and we don't want to go back. So I think it is the case that will affect the younger generations in Hong Kong in the future. Oh, and I think back to Taiwan situation. I remember when Tsai Ing-wen is having her international press conference. There's I can't remember if it is from CNN, that a reporter asked her whether she think she has to thank President Xi for that, and actually the translator translated very poorly, and the answer is totally not relevant to the question. But to me, I think she has President Xi, Carrie Lam, the Hong Kong police to thank for her election victory.
Let me ask you about LegCo now. So we have the LegCo elections coming up this year. Let's say we're in the same situation we're in at that time as we are in now, kind of a standoff. We haven't really seen much change in the government here. You noted we have a new liaison office, but we still have the same chief executive. We have the same administration. We have people protesting, flares up, cools off. If we're in that same situation when the LegCo elections happen, not asking you necessarily to predict number of seats or that kind of thing, but will we see this, and will we see it on the issues? Will the issues be around the protests and be around perhaps an anti-China kind of reflection, the way it was in Taiwan? Christine, I'll start with you.
Well, I think for DC District Council will be a barometer for the outcome, would be the barometer for those discontent of local citizens about what they dislike or dissatisfied about government. But for electrical situation, I think it's rather slightly different with what the outcome will be. Certainly, I think the government have to do something, step forward. If there's nothing changed, if the probably even I myself suggest they have the ex-council member to be revamped. So they should do something, step down. Someone have to be, retire earlier, because they did delay the response to the public since June. That's what I always mentioned, and set up the COI, Independent Council Commission of Inquiry, is important as well. But if they don't do something, then certainly I think the LegCo election will have some changes. But of course, the Legislative Council election is slightly different, especially talking about ideology, about how they run the government. In fact, as I said, and I heard from my friend from Democratic, I think it's not easy to run a government. And in fact, Hong Kong is completely different with Taiwan. And no matter geographically and the history before, so we cannot deny that Hong Kong is really a part of China. And if we push up the campaign, keep it up for radical, and spoil all the things, no matter business transaction or investment, Hong Kong is really difficult. You know, there's no, there are many business investment will change. That's what my concern is. So once, if there's many uncertainty, that will also affect the international angle about who should come to Hong Kong and what is the best to Hong Kong is also important. So if this kind of situation, say, for example, like a friend of mine, they are still, if they still filibustering inside the electrical, talking about 49 items, talking about 7.5 billion are not being granted or approved, that everything's stuck into our society, then there will be some problem. Probably those election outcome may be slightly changed. I think most of the foreigners, they invest in Hong Kong, they look for stability. But democracy is important, but not cover everything. We think progressive is important. And as I said again, restore our normal situation in a better investment phenomenon or situation is important in Hong Kong.
Thank you. Derek, do you want to make some, you're the political science person or the professor. Do you want to make some predictions or thoughts on what happens with LegCo?
Yeah, I hate saying it's too early to say, but I have to say it but it is in much higher degree of complexity right now. As I said, now the liaison office chief, has been changed. So even and the pro-Beijing camps are in total disarray. They really have no idea what the new policy directives or new policy is going to be from Beijing. So it's now too early for them to think about of how to deal with the election itself. And as I said, for the pro-democracy camp, it's still too early to see whether the localists or the populists or the newcomers where they're going to challenge their allow me to put it, their hegemony, the pandemic hegemony in the LegCo in the LegCo election. And indeed, the making of Luo Huining as the new liaison office chief is very interesting because it shows Beijing is not only unhappy with the liaison office itself, but also.
Do you think it matters? Do you think putting this new guy in is going to change anything?
It's not happy with the entire governing coalition in Hong Kong, and it's not just about the pro-Beijing camp. It's about the government, the liaison office, the business sector, and the pro-Beijing camp all together. So this is, this may end the current governance model that has been there for a decade or two. So in a way, but I still believe, of course, given the current political situation, the pro-democracy will at least win maybe 5 to 7, maybe to 8 seats win extra 5 to 8 seats in the coming LegCo election.
And you get to have the last word before questions from the audience.
I lose my confidence to predict things now because
that's a good politician answer.
Half year before I can predict the Hong Kong situation will be like this, and every time I predict and I expect the government to respond, and every time they failed, and I can't really have some good prediction. But I think there are a few issues that will affect the election very much is that whether the Hong Kong government is responding to the demands, whether Carrie Lam will still be here, because we heard a lot of news, especially from our friends here, that Carrie Lam is going to step down in March. We still got 2 months, and I think it shows Hong Kong people whether the Hong Kong and Chinese government is willing to make changes. Are they really sincere to listen to Hong Kong people's voice? I think that's one of the very important element that Hong Kong people look at. And I also think that whether the Beijing government is trying to change its policy to Hong Kong, I think it also affects the Legislative Council very much, because, as Derek said, Lo Wei-Ling is a new guy, and a lot of people said the Central Liaison Office is going to break down, and the pro-Beijing camp, they really don't know about this guy, because it's totally new to them. He is never ever been in the Hong Kong Macau office system in the central government. So I think his arrival, it meant something like the Central Liaison Office is going to revamp, but whether it is going to reform in a way to exert more power in Hong Kong, or it is going to step back and let the Hong Kong government rule, I think that makes a very great difference. And I'm quite pessimistic that I think Lo Wei-Ling is going to step forward and play a more important role in Hong Kong governance. And if that is the case, I think Hong Kong people will come out and strike again.
Okay, well, we've got some time for questions now, so there'll be microphones going around. If you could identify yourself and your affiliation when you ask a question, and right over here.
Thank you. My name is Frank Ching. I've been a correspondent member of this club for 45 years. At various times, I worked for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Far East Economic Review. And yesterday was the ceremonial opening of the legal year in Hong Kong. And I noticed that all of the speakers referred to the disturbances in Hong Kong over the last 7 months. And some were more direct, some were less direct, in condemning people who have been criticizing judges personally for decisions that they made in court. I think it was said by the Chief Justice that you should not criticize a judge for a decision. You don't decide if there's rule of law based on whether you win or lose a case. The same things were said by the chairman of the Bar Association, president of the Law Society, and so forth. So I wonder what our three panelists today think of such actions, setting fires to courthouses, condemning judges and their families by name. I understand there is an understanding within the Democratic camp that people don't criticize each other. Does this extend to not criticizing criminal activities? Do you condone such activities, or do you condemn them, the three of you present?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
You want to go ahead?
thank you, Brian. I think firstly, as I said, I will support to have COI, Commission of Inquiry, and have independent investigation in all aspects. It's not just only condemning police or whoever. This is not the way, and reflect yeah. And I agree that, and I really disagree with all those any violence in Hong Kong, whatsoever happened since June. And I believe most of the Hong Kong people are the same way. So we support protests, but we dislike any violence. And so for people who condemning even burn or set fire in the court, of course, this is ridiculous, I would say. And we shouldn't do that. In fact, so So back to normal. That's what I agree that to have COI, to have investigation, then can shut all the rest of the people mind up, mouth up to show, you know, whoever do the illegal things, and they have to, you know, face the reality of the court. So that's what I agree, and I think calling dialogue is important in the outcome. Is the government should step forward to talk to the youngest. And as I said, after the election already, so why not my friend from Democratic Party, they sit down and think about what we should do next for the better of Hong Kong. That's my most, hopefully, come out.
Okay, let's let the panelists answer the questions, please. Okay, go ahead.
I think I've been asked of this question continuously and repeatedly throughout the last 3 or 4 months, where the escalation happened. Whether you are going to condemn those violence, whether you're going to condemn those who break the MTR station, those who break the banks and vandalizing or hurting people. My answer is always like, I can't condemn that. I can't, because at this moment of Hong Kong's time, first of all, I don't think it's useful to condemn anything. I don't condemn the police. I just don't like them, and they're just wrong. And I think if you want to arrest them, then you arrest them. You don't need to condemn them. And the police is arresting them already. So does it make it a better society if we condemn them? I don't think so. How do we make it a better society? I think it's for the police to take accountability to themselves. Before that, I will not condemn those protesters or those violent users. I think it's hard for me to condemn them. Yeah.
Okay. Derek, did you want to add anything?
I'm very unhappy with those acts, and of course I don't mind condemning them, but I don't think my voice would matter much, but because to me the one country two system is largely broken, with maybe the rule of law as the only piece remaining intact. So I think we still need to preserve this very last cornerstone of the Hong Kong system, or maybe the one country two system. But as I said, I've raised a number of times in the session that today we're living in a populist world. We're in a global populist wave. A lot of people, even we Hong Kongers are strong believer of the rule of law, but still, when they are being, you know, infected, influenced, whatever, by populism, sometimes to them they may be hostile to the judges, to the lawmakers, and would do some you know, populist act. So I guess is about picking the right framework to examine what's happening in the past 7 months.
And you wanted to
Yeah,
add
yeah.
a quick thought?
Yeah, because I think rule of law is not just about the court. It's also about the law enforcement and also about the prosecution side. The law enforcement is totally skilled. The prosecution is totally skilled. So yesterday, when Secretary of Justice Teresa Jiang said about rule of law or rule of mob, I think the government is the rule of mob now, truly, because the prosecution is so biased. The arrest, the law enforcement is so biased. That ruins rule of law the most, I think.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. There's one right here. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Alexandra Tracy from Hoiping Ventures. What do you all think is the likelihood of the government trying to push forward on the national anthem law before July? Clearly that would be incredibly inflammatory, but it seems that Beijing's very keen to see progress.
Okay, Christine, you want to start?
Well, I think they probably government would like to push the national anthem songs to everybody. But I think, well, this is an education way. You know, when kids grow up, I would recommend they do it in a softened way. I go to my relatives. They live in United States. They will learn from their school to have their United States songs. So same as in Hong Kong and China. I think to set up by rule or law probably may not be a good way. So that's my position on this issue. So I will leave it to government to decide, but it's not the good way to educate Hong Kong people. Thank you.
Do you think this is going to happen?
Sadly, yes, because I think, well, I would say I don't take Priscilla Leung into very serious legislation issues, because the legislation itself, if you put it, because the anthem law, national anthem law, is already already legislated in the mainland, but you can't just put it through in Hong Kong, because we don't have something like administrative detention for 15 days in Hong Kong. We don't have such things. So I think it's impossible for them to just let the law run itself. But I still hope that the government can stop pushing for that, because after all, people respect the national anthem not because there is a legislation. People respect the national anthem with their heart. The situation now is that why do the people they don't respect the national anthem, or why they did all those things during the football matches, is because there's a lot of problems that arise in Hong Kong, which matters Hong Kong and China, and we think China is sort of suppressing Hong Kong and making Hong Kong not like Hong Kong. And that is why the people are so pissed off. And you add a new legislation to them, it doesn't make them feel better. It doesn't scare them off. You can't arrest all the people in the stadium, right? So I think it's not of any help to Hong Kong's situation. But this is also one thing that back to my previous point, whether the Beijing government is going to step a step backward or a step forward. I think the clashes between Hong Kong and China mainly lies on the responsibility mainly lies on the Beijing side, because they keep on stepping into the Hong Kong judiciary, Hong Kong society. For example, the Cathay Pacific cases. There are a lot of cases like this, and I think Hong Kong people are very unhappy about it, and the national anthem law just add into that unhappiness.
Okay, yeah, Derek, you wanted to add something?
I think this very question of national anthem law, national anthem, precisely reflect the trickiness and ambiguity of Hong Kong politics. To me, the legislator, President Leung, raised this very issue because she wants to test the reaction of the new liaison office chief and Beijing, because they are facing huge uncertainty, as I said, because Lo has arrived, but he hasn't met the pro-Beijing party's members yet, and they have no idea what they're going to do. So to them, it is a safe bet. It is a safe way to raise this national anthem law to test the reaction of Beijing, and this is because it's politically correct. This can't be wrong in the eyes of Beijing. So if Beijing or the liaison office is backing this move, then the whole camp will follow, and then we'll push it further. This is my analysis.
Okay, we have time for one more quick question. Yeah, over here.
Hello, my name is John Antweiler. I'm retired. I've lived in Hong Kong for 20 years. My question is, and I should say that ever since I became a permanent resident, I have always voted in the elections. My question is, it goes to an old saying that all politics is local. And we've been sort of assuming that the results of the district elections, district council elections, are a referendum on how Hong Kong is governed or what's going on in Hong Kong. But I guess I would step back and say, as district councilors, would you say that the local Mrs. Chang, when she's opening her fish stall in the morning, says there's something fundamentally wrong locally, and that's why there's been a change? Or is this a reflection that people in Hong Kong have risen above local issues and say, no, there's something much more important than our local issues?
Okay. Who would like to take that? And again, let's, if we could try to do it quickly.
Thank you,
We're
John.
running out of time.
Yeah, thank you, John. In fact, well, firstly, livelihood issues, of course, is important. But I do think some expertise or even some Hong Kong people, they dissatisfy the progress of those local livelihood things. They do it too slow, I would say, which I were used to be opposition camp in my district council. I always provide solution, asking government, pushing them to speed up those things. But politically, I agree that it's globally. And Hong Kong is quite special. It's under one country, two system. And the system in our council are rather, it's not comprehensive yet. We don't have political party law. So whatever funding from my friend party or the previous establishment camp party, we don't know nothing about them. And how are they going to arrange their fund or whatever to the local is different. I think I'm hoping that they can do some more transparency or reform our council instead of just keep polarization in the society. That's what I'm aiming for. And I hope since they are in the Pan-Democratic Party friends, they are in the system of our council now, they should reform it as soon as possible. But of course, to or higher level of government level, they may not completely pleased with their request. In fact, that's the old way. There's so much to be changed and need to be reformed. That's my angle.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's a little bit different in Hong Kong than in other countries because, you know, the district council is just a consultative body, and we have no actual power delegated to us, and we can't actually legislate our local laws that we don't allow something in our district. We can't do that. So basically, we're not being seen as an executive arm that to deliver things in the community. So I think this is the difference why Hong Kong people, they don't see that as a local issue. When things are not going well, then we blame the district council. It's not like everything goes to the government. Every blames go to the government. So this is their problem as well. We always advocate for empowerment of the district council. But I also think there are quite a lot of people who are unsatisfied with the district council, how it works. Because in the past, we see a lot of different kind of news that district council, they're giving the funding to their own friends. They're not even making a very good declaring interest and something like that. And I think people demands the council to be accountable and to have a transparency. So we're of course we're going to move to that side. We are going to make our district council more transparent. But as Christine just said, why is that we have to do it now, not in the past? I think this is also a question for the pro-establishment side. Why in the past Hong Kong people have been so upset, but they are not doing anything to reform the council? But wait until we're in the power, we're in control, then wait for us to do that? Why is it happening? So I think it is also a problem that the pro-establishment side need to think about.
Thank you. Derek, did you want to add anything?
Okay. Things in one country, two systems are supposed to be quite local. But after the 2003 rally, and especially 2008, there came the so-called second governing team thesis from one of the research director in the liaison office, which means liaison office will rule together with Hong Kong government, so to deal with some national security issues and other things that Beijing cares. So and also after Xi Jinping comes to power, there came the so-called the concept of overall jurisdiction, 全面管治权. So in practice, Beijing put itself into the equation, into the Hong Kong politics, and bundle everybody together, in a governing coalition. So there's no firewall between each of them. So you see in the current crisis, when the local side burns, it burns all the way to Beijing. So I would say in these days, unless Beijing change its policy, otherwise the same thing would happen over and over again. There's nothing as purely local politics in Hong Kong.
Well, we could discuss this all day, but we all have other things we need to do. So please join me in thanking our panelists. And we have some FCC gifts to give them. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.